Welcome to the Essential 99 Punctuation Rules for Court Reporters, video number 9, the comma part 2. I am Ken Wick. Let's get started. So this video covers the comma, and specifically ebook rules number 6 and 7, which are introductory prepositional phrases and introductory transitional or parenthetical expressions. Introductory prepositional phrases. So, rule number 6, use a comma to separate a long, that's defined as 4 or more words, introductory prepositional phrase. However, the comma is required for all introductory prepositional phrases that contain a verb or reduce clarity. So if you don't know, this subject of putting a comma after an introductory prepositional phrase has been debated online, or is a source of contention, or can be a source of contention among people. And I just want to go over what the different references say. So remember, our rule is you use a comma to separate long 4 or more introductory prepositional phrases. Some people would say you put them after every phrase. So let's just see what the sources say. So the different references say, LMEG says basically you separate introductory prepositional phrases that are 4 or more words. The BGGP says 4 or 5 words. Literally says 4 or 5 words. But it also, the prepositional phrase can't contain a verb, and it can't contain a secondary prepositional phrase. And what I mean by that is you'd have 2 short prepositional phrases back to back, like, oh no, I'm going to make up something, after lunch, in the afternoon. That'd be less than 5 words. So you'd have one followed by the other. You can't have 2 prepositional phrases. So if you have that, they say, oh, you need to stick a comma after the first prepositional phrase. That isn't included in my rule because I don't think it occurs very often. And if you do have it, usually it's more than 5 words. So I didn't include it. The other references say, the GRM, the Gregg Reference Manual, says, it basically says use the comma. However, the comma may be omitted if there's 3 conditions, 4 or less words. It doesn't really say this. It says short. But if you look at the examples, all the examples have 4 or less words. At 2, it says it can't contain a verb. And 3, it can't reduce clarity. So you can see how I developed my rule. Well, hold on, I got one more source. Sorry. Then I decided to look at CMOS, that's the Chicago Manual of Style, see what it had to say, because it's a well-known style guide. It says that basically these introductory phrases are usually followed by a comma. However, the comma may not be needed unless there's unless a misreading is likely. So it basically says that so you have the people that says you always need it, and there'll be people, oh no, you can omit it after the short one. Well, believe it or not, the answer to that question is it depends on what style guide you're following. So if you're following LMEG, you do this. If you're following the BGGP, you do this. Gregg says basically use the comma, but it may be omitted. And CMOS says, well, it's usually followed by one. So believe it or not, the people that say it can be omitted, they are correct. You can omit it depending on the style guide. But the people who say they always put it, you know what? It's never wrong to put it. So if you put a comma after every introductory prepositional phrase, you would be correct. But just if you don't know, style guides do allow, in the GRM, the CMOS, do allow you to omit that comma. And specifically the style guides for court reporting say actually that you are to omit the comma. For the LMEG, it's four words or less, and for the BGGP it's 4 or 5 words or less. But it also can contain a verb and it can contain a secondary prepositional phrase. Now, I know that's been a long intro to this, but I think it's important because this is definitely a rule that someone may actually specifically watch this video for, and I want to discuss it because people, if I just said the rule, they say, oh, that isn't right, but these are all the references, or these are what these references say. You can go look them up. So if you don't like my rule, you can follow the rule that's listed. But my rule is you basically use a comma for a long introductory phrase. So I'm actually saying omit it for short ones. But you have to use the comma if there's a verb or reduces clarity. Now, this is also subject to your opinion. What is reducing clarity? So let's look at a few examples. Remember, I'm using 4 or less words. Maybe I should go back to the 4 or less words. You can see actually matches the LMEG, matches the BGGP, and it matches the examples in the GRM. So that's why I use 4 or less words. Here's examples where the comma is required. In the late evening, we saw Mr. Smith at the bank. So here's the introductory prepositional phrase. It has 4 or less words. Oh, sorry. That the comma that only has 4 words. So they're actually the comma is not required. Yeah, sorry. Actually, back up. Whoop. Didn't mean to go down that far. Actually, going back to number 1 is required. It's 4 or more words. I'm just confusing myself with the previous discussion. So, and then a comma is required on reaching California. We stopped for lunch. This one's required because there's actually a verb involved. So just clarify 4 or more and verb. Then comma may be omitted. In 1884, tornado deaths dropped by 5%. This is probably about the classic example that I saw listed for short ones, is that they had this in and then a date, and they tended to omit the comma after that. So if you're looking for a good example of where it can be omitted, this is the classic example that was listed in the references. After lunch, we saw Mr. Smith at the bank. So just 2 words. So it can be omitted. Comma needed for clarity. In May, June graduated from college. Whoops, forgot the period there. Well, here we insert it because maybe someone would just read it. In May, June graduated from college. In May, because these are both proper nouns. Maybe someone can get confused on initial reading. So if we put the comma, it will add clarity. And I would say the other good example is when you have 2 adjacent numbers. So even though we said the classic example is in 1884, it's omitted. But here, since we have a following number, it may be confusing. So in 1884, 42 people died from tornadoes. So here we actually insert it for clarity. So rule number 7 says, use a comma to separate an introductory, transitional, or parenthetical expression. 1-syllable transitional expressions, hence, then, thus, so, yet, are not set off with a comma. So just a little bit of difference between the references on which words the comma may be omitted. LMEG has hence, thus, so, and yet. The BGGP has all 1-syllable transitional expressions. And the GRM has hence, then, thus, so, and yet. Now, my rule also says 1 syllable because all these are 1 syllable in the LMEG and the GRM. And if you look down the list of transitional expressions, I'm pretty sure these are basically the one syllable transitional expressions. And if not, they're the most common. So it's easier just to remember, not memorizing a list, but just you can easily recall, oh, if it's one syllable, don't do the comma. And a note on now and then as a transitional, because now and then at the beginning of a sentence can have slightly different meanings. And one of them you use a comma and one of them you don't. So if now and then, so the way to remember this is that if it means well, then use a comma. And how I memorize this is that sometimes I'm unsure because technically like yet and so can also be coordinating conjunctions. And how I test to see if I need a comma or is it acting as a transitional expression or as a conjunction, I'll actually substitute in another word there that means the same thing that I know is a coordinating conjunction, like and or but, and to see if it's a coordinating conjunction. Or if I want to know if it's functioning as a transitional expression, I'll substitute however or therefore, because I know those two are transitional expressions or conjunctive adverbs. So that's what I'm doing here. Because well is basically a parenthetical expression. We know, and this is a known parenthetical expression. And we'll separate the parenthetical expressions with a comma. So if now and then mean well, or you can substitute this word, then use a comma. If now and then relate to time or sequence, like I ran to the store, then to the bank, you're not using it as a parenthetical like well. So if it relates, so if now and then relate to time or sequence, then no comma. Just a tip. So some examples of a transitional expression. I heard the scream, period. However, I did not call the police. So this is a conjunctive adverb, and we put a comma after it because it's more than one syllable. I heard the scream, yet I did not call the police. Once again, it's a conjunctive adverb or transitional expression. If you don't know, some sources list some words as a transitional expression and some list them as a conjunctive adverb, I believe. So exactly what is defined as what is sometimes a little bit of some sources put them in one category and some sources put them in another. So if I say, this is why I've always lumped conjunctive adverbs and transitional expressions together, because the sources will mix them a little bit, but effectively the punctuation's the same. So who really cares if that word is really a conjunctive adverb or transitional expression? Because at the end of the day, it's going to be punctuated the same. So I heard the scream, yet I did not call the police. Once again, this is a transitional expression, but it's one syllable, so no comma. I took the medicine. As a result, I fell asleep quickly. So this is a transitional expression. So we put a comma after it. Parenthetical expressions, some examples. In my opinion, you stole the jewelry. Maybe just to back up and once again say the difference between a transitional expression is usually you can slide the transitional expression around in the sentence. You can't really delete it because it's showing the relationship, but you can delete a parenthetical and have no problem. So, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if you say, oh, this is a transitional or parenthetical because it's punctuated exactly the same way. So in my opinion, he stole the jewelry. I still remember the license plate, comma, obviously I have a good memory. So this transitional expression, put a comma after it. Remember, it's only one syllable transitional expressions. Or you can say one syllable. If you find a one syllable word, no comma. Everything else, put a comma. That's it for this video. Please subscribe. If you like the video, please hit like. And please buy the ebook. Thank you.